Hi, my name is Giulia Peruggia, and I'm an assistant professor at Eindhoven University of Technology. The work I'm going to present is entitled Models of Often Ambivalent Robot Stereotypes, Content, Structure, and Predictors of Robots' Age and Gender Stereotypes, and has been carried out together with Letitia Bohr, Laura van der Bij, Oke Rickmenspohl, Robin Foppen, and Stefano Guidi. When we meet a person for the first time, the first characteristics we appraise are their communion, whether they are sociable and friendly, and their agency, their ability to act upon their intentions. The stereotype content model posits that communion and agency are the building blocks of stereotypes and can combine to form univalent stereotypes, either completely positive or completely negative, as well as ambivalent stereotypes, with communion overpowering agency or vice versa. The content of stereotypes that a person elicits predicts the emotions people will perceive towards that person, as well as the behavioral tendencies people will enact towards them. While we facilitate those high in communion and agency, we harm those that we perceive as low in both, and enact ambivalent discriminatory tendencies towards those that elicit ambivalent stereotypes. Social categorization, the attribution of social categories such as age and gender based on ostensible characteristics, has a huge impact on stereotyping. Age and gender stereotypes not only prescribe which traits certain social groups should have, but also which tasks these groups are suitable for. This study aims to identify the content and structure of robot stereotypes, determine whether robots' appearance features could play a role in influencing stereotyping and whether this role is actually mediated by the robot's perceived age and gender, and finally disclose what individual characteristics make us as humans more prone to stereotype robots. To achieve this objective, we performed an online study online survey. We selected 80 images of robots from the ABOT database and randomly divided them into 4 groups of 20 images. We randomly allocated 30 participants to each of these groups and asked them to rate the robots in the images. For each robot, participants were shown a picture, and they were asked to rate their perception in terms of communion, agency, suitability for female, and suitability for male tasks. Participants were also asked to indicate their age and gender, their familiarity with AI, sci-fi, and robots, their tendency to anthropomorphize, and their benevolent and hostile sexism. To disclose the content and structure of robot stereotypes in terms of communion and agency and also female and male task suitability, we performed 2 k-means cluster analysis. For communion and agency, we identified 4 clusters of robots corresponding exactly to the stereotype content model. 2 univalent clusters, including robots perceived as low in both communion and agency or high in both communion and agency, and 2 ambivalent clusters, including robots perceived as high in communion and low in agency, or the opposite. What was interesting to notice was that the robots low in communion and agency had very disparate characteristics, but all shared a certain dull human likeness, while the robots high in both communion and agency were highly human-like or android ones. Moreover, the robots high in communion and low in agency were mostly juvenile and had pronounced facial features, whereas those low in communion and high in agency were all quite adult-like and had very few facial features. For suitability for male and female tasks, we identified 2 clusters of robots, one including robots with low female and low male task suitability, and one including robots with high female and high male task suitability. The low suitability cluster featured half-bodied or sitting robots, whereas the high suitability clusters featured full-bodied robots. Hence, it seems that the perception of task suitability has more to do with body parts than social categories. To confirm or disconfirm these results and also understand the extent to which robots' appearance features, perceived gender, and perceived age actually had an influence on the perception of communion and agency and task suitability, we tested 6 different path models. All the models featured human likeness, body manipulators, surface look features, and facial features from the ABOT database as predictors. The first 3 models featured agency and communion as dependent variables, and the perceived femininity and masculinity, perceived gender neutrality, and perceived age ratings from the RoboGap dataset as further predictors. The last 3 models featured task suitability as dependent variable, and again, the perceived femininity and masculinity, perceived gender neutrality, or perceived age ratings from the RoboGap dataset as further predictors. What we discovered was that body manipulators and surface look features affected the perception of agency, but via the robot's human likeness. Body manipulators affected the perception of communion via masculinity and femininity. Surface look features marginally affected the perception of communion via femininity. And also they affected the perception of agency via the robot's age. Finally, facial features and surface look features affected the perception of communion via the robot's age. What these results tell us is that it's not just the perception of age and gender in a robot that elicits stereotypes, but also the appearance features used to suggest age and gender in the robot. When female robots embed surface look features such as eyelashes, apparel, head hair, they are more likely to elicit paternalistic stereotypes in line with female gender. When juvenile robots feature facial features such as head, eyes, and a mouth, they are more prone to activate paternalistic stereotypes of low agency and high communion, and less prone to activate envious stereotypes of high agency and low communion. And we hypothesize that this is due to the fact that facial features are those that we actually manipulate to achieve perceptions of childlikeness in robots following the baby schema. Interestingly, the only social category that was not stereotyped in the study was the male robot. The fact that it was human likeness itself and not masculinity to predict agency, a stereotypical male trait, can be taken to support once again the hypothesis that robots are attributed male gender and masculine characteristics by default, and that the perception of female gender and female characteristics in robots is actually marked. To add a further layer of depth to this analysis, we performed a number of linear mixed effects hierarchical regressions to determine which participants' characteristics had an effect on stereotyping. While male robots were relatively untouched by stereotypes, as we have seen, we discovered that participants' male gender, hostile sexism, and benevolent sexism made participants especially sensitive to male stereotypes, with men perceiving robots as less suited for male tasks, hostile sexism reducing robots' perceived agency, and benevolent sexism, in line with its proverbial paternalism, increasing perceived agency. In conclusion, while this paper substantiates the idea that a robot's design, especially in terms of appearance, has a role in eliciting stereotyping, this last result also outlines that our personal biases and discriminatory tendencies leak in the way we perceive robots. Part of the HRI community has already started to discuss issues of bias and discrimination in the design of robots. However, we hope to see a more extensive discussion of these issues in the future. To facilitate this process, we make the dataset we collected in this study, the Strobo dataset, publicly available with our paper. Thank you very much.